Hi again, everybody. I'm joined with two incredible storytellers, as Eamon was able to just tell you guys. And today we're going to be diving deep into three topics. One being time, the other being radicalism, and the last being the genius quality that we all have within ourselves. And so I'm really honored and excited to be sharing this stage with both of you, but especially an author who wrote my current favorite book. If you guys got a chance to chat with me at dinner yesterday, you heard me rave about it. But really, it's one of my favorite pieces because it really captures the imagination of a reader, but it's also educational, relevant, and absolutely needed for the repertoire of leading change. At least that's my opinion. But even Stephen King himself, the legend, gave a review of the book. So if that doesn't speak to it, I don't know what else does. But before we begin with you, Stephen, I actually want to start with Peter. Peter.
Save the best for the last.
Peter, you are a renowned writer, producer, director. I'm sure that means you have read so many things, so many books, so many pieces of work, right? But when we first started talking about this panel, you told me you read this book 2-3 times.
I'm on my third.
Third time.
It's very thick, in case you can tell.
And on his third time, was there like anything in particular that stood out to you, maybe around the topic of time that you would?
Yes. First of all, I'm so grateful that Nina left her power tools here because they're needed. I came to this conference, I've come a number of years, but this time I came with a certain amount of alarm, given the circumstances we're in, the time we're in. And whenever I come here, I hear these great speeches, and there's so many smart people, and they're doing such great things. I find myself feeling better, but the alarm is still sounding for me, and the reason that is we know how to solve climate change. That's not our problem. Our problem is time. It's like we're playing a game of environmental Jenga tower right now, where yes, the coral reefs are bleached and dying, pull out a block. Yes, the oceans are heating faster than we ever thought they would, pull out another block, and on and on. And so I found myself, as I was thinking, after I was reading this book, and I really will get to this quickly because this is the most exciting part of this, but I found myself thinking about the word radicalism. And what does that mean in this time and in this context? And the question that's come to me, which I think really is the one for this panel and maybe for all of us, is how much is enough to change quickly enough? How much is enough to change quickly enough? Because that is the key to us surviving this time. I mean, we're really at a moment. This is the moment. What does radicalism mean to each of us? That's the challenge. And how much of that is enough? How much radicalism is enough to change quickly enough? And then it finally takes us to the genius quality thing. That's a friend of mine's term. And what it means is that everybody has a genius quality. It's either something you were born with and or something you developed. It's what you're best at. And so all of us, what are our genius qualities? What are they? And how can we radicalize them? And we're going to talk about what that means next. So the book. It is phenomenal. It's one of the best books I've maybe ever read. It's a fiction based on fact about climate change. It takes us from the near past through the present into the near future. And Stephen has a number of approaches to the challenges of climate change through the different characters in it. All the way from Ash, a character who's a mathematician, a brilliant thinker who works within the system throughout and does the best he can, to Kate, who's my favorite character, who created a thing called a shock collar. She works within the system, but really aggressively, and all the way to ecoterrorism. And so I think what I want to do is just give you a taste of it really quick, so you get a flavor for it, and then turn it over to Stephen to actually talk about. I find myself suddenly a little nervous reading a book out loud in front of the guy who wrote it. Do you want to read it?
No, don't feel nervous. You go. You practiced.
You practice. Practice this.
Okay, here we go. Digging back to my acting days. This is a character named Tony Petrus, who's on a climate panel that's him along with a politician and some financial people, and they're kind of advocating for the status quo, and this is his response to that in this moment. Here's the bad news for all of you. We've reached the end of growth. Raising people out of poverty and maintaining Western standards of consumption are simply no longer possible. That's why I didn't want to come to this bullshit charade. Frankly, you people are exactly the reason real action on our ecological situation cannot move forward, because the only real way to do it is to not have lone wealthy individuals consuming the resources of small nations, which is, as far as I can tell, is the premise of this entire gathering. Look at the list of attendees you have here. How many of them come from companies that suck hydrocarbons out of the ground? No offense, but those are the dues-paying members of Davos and the Sustainable Future Coalition. And that's a joke. And you all are a joke. Tomorrow there's a panel called The Future of Extractives, which I guess is yet another joke, since there can be no future of extractives, at least not if we want to survive this. Davos brings in pop stars or teenagers every year to yell at them, but the market is still more real to the people here than nature. Furthermore, to gird our infrastructure and pay for an aging population in China and the West, we'll need a drastic reallocation of financial resources. There's simply no other way, and yes, it will come at the cost of growth. You people are all living in a bell jar if you think differently. So you can tell yourselves that everything's going to be A-okay, but I can assure you it is not. And I pray there's somebody watching this video in about 20 years, because all 4 of you are going to look like freaking stupid idiots. That's the tone.
It wasn't freaking. That wasn't the word.
That wasn't the word. I thought
Yes, this is not a PG-13.
Don't bastardize a great author and prose, Peter.
I'm just taking in the sensibility that some people may have. Anyway, so.
No, yeah, and I feel like the beginning part of that quote, hopefully you guys can hear me okay. We're at the end of growth.
Right.
That's so powerful, and I want to kind of, I know, how do you feel about that?
Let me start by saying that the book is multiple different characters, and these people carry with them their perception on the climate crisis, right?
Right.
So you're getting these viewpoints from all these different angles to create sort of this cacophony of voices. And all of them are sort of vying in their own ways for what we should do about it. And what's really important as an author of fiction is to not inject your personal viewpoints necessarily into the characters, to not make them mouthpieces for everything you think. Because that, sort of leads to bad fiction, right? That leads to bad storytelling. And what I had to do, or the thought experiment I had to do, was enter the point of view of all these different characters and try to see the world through their eyes, try to see it through their perception, and give them a full-throated opportunity to sort of give voice to what they thought should be done about the crisis.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and I feel like that part right there is the characters all approach it from a different perspective, a different angle, right? And what I felt from a lot of characters, especially, in the beginning of the novel, is a lot of them aren't quite sure if their actions are 100% the right answers.
Right.
A lot of them feel confident, they are passionate.
Yes.
And so that kind of leads me to our next section about radicalism, right? With us all having these different approaches, right? And not really knowing what the right answer is, how do we take an approach that is timely, radical, effective, but isn't perpetuating the same challenges and problems we've had?
So I spent 12 years writing this novel. It is a slim 960 pages right now. The first draft I turned into my editor was 1,500 pages, right? So it was long, and I worked very hard on it. During that time, the politics around climate shifted, the resistance to it increased, but also the warning signs we're seeing proliferated, and in a way that was like beyond alarming. It felt like I'd write things into my novel, and then they'd happen in the real world, and I would have to go back and change them to be more frightening, because the temperatures, the politics, it had all gotten scarier, right? Having said all that, I often ask myself, like, is this really what you should be spending your time on? Is writing a little story about the future of the world? Should I be gluing myself to paintings? Should I be lying down in a road? Should I be doing this or that or the other? And you know what I came to sort of say to myself was like, this is like one of the key elements missing about this fight, which is we need to give people a narrative that allows them to understand the stakes and the urgency of this crisis. And I hope that's what the book does, is people read it, and at least from like the feedback I've gotten, that is what it does. It gives people the opportunity to sort of open not just their minds, but their hearts to the moment we're all in, and hopefully activate them into their own sense of like, okay, we do need to get radical.
Do you find yourself in this moment in time relating to one approach more than another as the most effective for now?
I mean, obviously, I think the beating heart of the novel is Kate Morris,
Right.
Who is sort of an activist who is like absolutely putting every ounce of herself and her organization into changing policy in DC, right? So it's all about the political elements. And I think, like, for me, that is a place where a lot of climate fiction doesn't stand up to scrutiny, because it ignores the political valences of our current crisis. It ignores the fossil fuel industry or the people who have power, and how we have to degrade that power in any way possible, right? And so Kate's approach is to look at how we not just build a climate movement that's a clubhouse, but an actual movement that includes people we disagree with, that includes people who might not think exactly the way we think. And so that, to me, is like, her voice became the most important in the book, because I was looking at the situation and seeing, okay, how would she react to this?
Kate Morris is one of my favorite as well, because she's such a balanced character in her approach. And it doesn't appear that way. She seems to be very aggressive in her approach, but because she welcomes everybody with open arms, there seems to be actual change that she can lead.
And I would also say, like, approaches the topic with humor and a lot of joy, which I think sometimes in climate circles can be missing from
joy.
The sense that, like, no, we're doing this because we love each other and we want to build this better world, not just because we're all terrified.
Yeah, that's special.
How do we move beyond this, though? I mean, this is all so great and so helpful and so encouraging and hopeful, but it just feels like, how do we do more? How do we make it actually stop and have an effect on what's happening? I mean, here we are, all of this genius here. I mean, what can we do to make it really have an impact that it needs to, given, like I said, the amount of time?
I would argue that it already has. I think
good, I can go home.
Yeah. I really think the youth climate strikes and Extinction Rebellion, a group in the UK who were blockading roads, I'm sure everybody knows that. I was mansplaining climate change for a second, sorry. I really think that period of time led to a sense of urgency that led to a lot of people in DC throwing their weight behind the Inflation Reduction Act, a bill that I really didn't think would ever make it over the finish line. And I've since gotten to know some people who worked on that bill, and I'm just like staggered by their dedication and the tenacity that they brought to that legislation. And I really think if we can keep that momentum going, it's going to prove one of the most game-changing pieces of legislation passed by a democracy ever.
Yet we have a possible president.
Absolutely.
Who might just...
And not to get political, but I think the most important thing any climate activist can do right now is something like the Environmental Voter Project. Like, winning the presidency and getting as many Democrats elected in this moment is so vital. And if they're not, there was a question asked yesterday, then the first order of business is defending the Inflation Reduction Act with every fiber of our being.
Yeah, and something that we talked about last year at this conference was the movable middle. That the piece of those who, can be influenced still. And that I wonder, how do we help people see these ideologies like radicalism, right? Like it's taken me a long time to even say the words radical on stage because of how stigmatized it
Yes.
is, right?
Yeah.
But it's, to me, the radicalness is having such profound thought, thinking so differently than we did before.
Yeah.
And I know that we resonate with that. So I'm wondering, how do you help people that are on the complete opposite side too, not just the movable
Right.
middle? How do we bridge that gap?
I think about it like this. I'm from Ohio. My first novel is very much about post-industrial Midwest, the opioid crisis, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It was sort of the precursor, like I was writing it, it was about Trumpism before Trump ever appeared on the scene, right? But I do think that what's happening now is those industries of decarbonization are suddenly springing up in every state. And as people's lives and livelihoods become attached to those industries, it's going to start to change their perception of clean energy, of what we call these solutions. And I sort of like do a tour around the speakers here, and I see so many people working on this inevitable shift, that this transition of our entire built environment, of our agricultural systems, of everything we're doing. And I think at some point we do have to say to ourselves, okay, this is like one of the hardest things human beings have ever had to do.
Right.
Like, it's going to be difficult.
Right.
The people who have power are not going to give it up without a fight. And so we I know there are always setbacks and we suffer these defeats, but like at the same time, we are starting to make serious progress, and we have to hold on to that and remember it and keep pushing.
Yeah, like Shia said, we're in an era of transformation.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I think we can all feel that.
You also go to the extreme in the book with environmental terrorism and violence. And I find myself, I mean, obviously, I'm not in any way a violent person, and nor ever could I be. But I do have two daughters who are 21 and 24, so they're your age. If anyone were pointing a gun at one of them, I would do anything I needed to do to protect them.
Right.
And I kind of feel, to a degree, like climate change is a gun pointed at your generation, and my kids. And so I find myself feeling like this moment of radicalization and really trying to go for a solution on some level is to prevent violence. It's to keep that from happening, the extremism. And I just wonder if you want to talk about that part of your book and see what you see in it and how to avoid that, given where we are.
Yeah, well, Emmy, you said something like I thought was incredibly smart the other day when we were talking, which is there's action and then there's intentional action, right? And so the fear of this and how frightening it is tends to develop a thing within certain people where they're like, okay, we need to do anything possible. But what if that thing is totally counterproductive and loses the support that you need?
Right.
I was in the UK talking to an activist named Rupert Reed, who was part of Extinction Rebellion and has now moved on from sort of direct action, blockading streets, to something called the Climate Majority Project, because his perception is that those actions, at least some of the stuff Just Stop Oil and other organizations were doing, is actually turning people off and becoming counterproductive. And in the book, this is a big thread of sort of how the politics begin to shift and lead to more reactionary forces coming in, right? And so I really do think that given the spread of clean energy technology and sort of the invitation to join the movement is going to become more powerful than extremism or you know, throwing paint at paintings or whatever else it is actually has been thus far, if that made sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like like you said, it all has a time and it all has a place.
Yeah.
And right now in this time, I think it's more
It's
prevalent than
time.
ever, that love and community connection to one another. Like my colleague Nina was saying, you know, something she didn't get to say on the stage, but kind of touched on was seeing each other as relatives. Like you said, like if we see one another, our communities as our kin,
Yeah.
as our relatives, as our resources, as relatives. That's what she said to me last night. I thought that was so powerful. See our resources as relatives, because then when the destruction happens, we'll be more called to protect it.
I also thought her spirit was so right for this moment. You know, there was such passion, as Eamon was talking about. There was such intention and will to really do what we need to do to make this work, to really reverse what's happening. You know, at least stop it, but reverse it. It just feels like that's why I started with her power tools. I mean, there's a spirit to this that I just would encourage everybody in all of your genius qualities and all of this gathering here, just to talk, you know, amongst ourselves and see if we can't come up with the things. Mm-hmm. You know, is it about taking all of the climate movements and all of the different balkanized groups and doing what the NRA's done and make them all one? And so we have more power to go out and really change things. I mean, what is it? What can we think of while we're here? How can we figure out a way to really have the impact we need given the amount of time we have left?
Do you want to do your quote or?
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. Are you getting worried by the time?
I'm like on edge. I'm like, oh my God, 45 seconds.
45 seconds, yes. I will, yeah,
I'm a
no.
little rule follower. So.
Just a bit. No, I think that's great. And yeah, I did want to finish this out with a quote from the book as well, but it's from Kate Morris. Again, she's a character who really brings everybody into the movement, and so that's why I felt like this was so important. She's talking about the opposite side, getting them onto, and the quote goes like this: "We offer our hands even when it's slapped away. We have to meet people where they are, and that means not cramming various guilts down their throats. We need an aspirational vision of our common humanity, solidarity." So I hope if we can leave anything with you guys today is, you know, really lean into your genius quality. Don't be scared to be radical, because we need something profound and different to happen. And let's be in connection with one another. Let's live in community and in love.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you.